name's Brian Clavisto, and I'm an organic chemistry professor, or a chemistry professor more broadly, I guess.
My name is Anthony Morgan. I am a PhD researcher, a science communicator, and a game designer. I founded a company called Science Everywhere in 2016. And that company was incubated at the Science Discovery Zone, where I met Brian.
Anthony was, when I first met him, it was really focused on science communication. I was able to convince him to do a PhD. And we took a tool that he had made called the Freestyle Social, which I will let him explain. And what we wanted to do is we wanted to bring that to the classroom.
So the Freestyle Social was an idea that originally came out of an event that I'd been to at Science North called the Science Cafe. We asked some really interesting questions, things like, should we bring back the woolly mammoth from extinction? And they'd bring a bunch of people into a bar, and they'd set up a panel of experts, and they'd all get to sit, the experts would sit at the front and discuss this back and forwards, and the audience would get to listen. And so I wanted to figure out, how can we make something like that, which is this really cool concept, way more interactive? And so Freestyle Socials are what we came up with. We'd put tape down the middle of the floor. We would ask those kinds of spark questions, things like, should we erase bad memories? Should we design our kids' DNA? Should we pee in the shower? There's a real range in the kinds of questions we ask. We would tell our audience, look, you've got 10 seconds. What does your gut tell you? Pick a side. And each half of them gets to explain to the other half why you should come over to this side. And the only rules of the game really are that if you hear an idea that surprises you or makes you laugh, and you think to yourself, I never thought of it that way. That's actually a pretty good point. I bet peeing in the shower, you would save a lot of water. Then you should suspend your judgment, change your mind, and physically walk over to the other side of the line. The point is to practice playing with these ideas, not take ourselves too seriously, and to practice changing our minds. It became obvious to us partway through this project that this was also a really good tool for critical thinking about just about any topic, including organic chemistry.
Organic chemistry is a scary topic where students come into the room with a predefined opinion of what that course is, even though they have had no interaction with it. And that polarized attitude really creates that flight or fight response where they can't think. They literally can't think. They're afraid to learn and make mistakes. We wanted to introduce some organic chemistry questions. We wanted people to get comfortable with organic chemistry. Silly stuff, it didn't matter, but now they were thinking about molecules, about chemistry, and they were getting comfortable using the words. And once you got comfortable using the words, how would that translate into outcomes for student learning? When we applied for this learning and teaching grant, we'd like to thank them for their support. We were in a difficult situation because we were having to do this online. And this game was actually then transformed to an online version where now people can play online.
The LTG grant, by and large, went to developing the digital platform to play Freestyle Social in an online setting. There was an experimental online game, and that one had a lot more of the gamification kinds of features that make games fun, right? Like that you get feedback, that you can see what progress you're making, that there are more elements of challenge and scorekeeping. One of the features we spent the most time working on was a queue feature in our game where anybody can grab the mic and the game automatically puts people in the queue. It tells them what order they are. So you're managing their expectations so that they're not frustrated at, I wanted to say something, and I keep getting cut off, or I never get a chance to. We've developed criterion for what makes a good question and a bad question. Good questions are the ones that are personally engaging, fun, exciting to think about, and the bad questions are obviously the inverse of that. We chose questions like, would you rather pour acetone or formaldehyde in your eye? Because people naturally have a personal stake when they're thinking about what's physically going to happen to their body when they do something like that. So they're more engaged. It's an absurd question. It's the kind of thing you can't argue while taking yourself seriously. So people are having fun with it, but they also really have to think deeply about the ramifications of any one of their decisions. They have to try to understand in a deep way the inquiry and analysis required to think through organic chemistry.
We play a game every week. How do we score this? How do we know that this is working fundamentally? Because our grading systems and assessment structures are not necessarily designed to work in like broad thought. It's very specific. Ultimately, the game is compelling storytelling. You are trying to convince people with your stories to come to the other side. One exercise that was developed during COVID, and it was called Molecule a Day. So every student has to make a 5-minute video about whatever they want. So they take a molecule like capsaicin, And they tell me that capsaicin, of course, is in peppers, chili peppers, all the hot things. And so tell me a story about it. So this 5-minute video was a very good proxy to look at how well they were good with compelling storytelling.
We look to the American Association of Colleges and Universities. They have developed recently some criterion, some rubrics essentially for assessing critical thinking, inquiry and analysis, a number of different domains tied to academic performance. And so now we've got independent raters who are taking all of these molecule a day assignments, some from after playing Freestyle Social, and some that never had the Freestyle Social, that was before we even created this. And we're having our independent raters assess all of these videos. Our raters have no idea who was in what condition, but we can now assess whether or not playing this game actually improves academic performance in real measurable ways. As a science communicator, 15 years in the field, the one thing I've learned about good science engagement is if they're not having fun, they're not going to come back. Why would they? So I'd rather make something that is super fun and it happens to be informative than super informative that happens to be fun. What really delighted me is that the feedback from students was overwhelmingly positive. They all said it was a super fun thing to do. It was way better than the kinds of assignments they typically get in their coursework, and they liked the experience.
I really started to appreciate humanities research and like working with humans, because time is not a variable in science. Like I go to a lab, I can do the experiment the exact same way in the future, no matter what. I can control that variable, but humans change with time. And so our control experiments were the same course, they had the exact same teachings, the exact same everything, but they were a different group of students who were accustomed to non-online learning, right? Where this cohort, the majority of them were just students online. So that their whole experience has always been online. So they're not great at telling stories anyway, just by the virtue that they haven't actually interacted with anybody outside their bubble. So we even had other problems in the classroom, like how do you engage people when their screen is off and they don't seem to care about anything? Like there were lots of compounded issues. My prediction right now is that there's going to be some wins, but the noise in the terms of the what we see is going to require many more iterations of this before we actually can confirm the suspicion or the hypothesis that this does make a difference in their learning outcomes. Sarah, Missouri, because she was a part of this too, and it really helped us with the grant. And she kept, so Anthony and I are big thinkers, and she's more of a realist. So that's really important to bring us back.
She's the one who recommended the AACU's rubrics. Ryan's right. That's the two of us can get quite swept away by ideas, and Sarah's very good for helping to make sure that we're grounded in reality and practicality and those kinds of things. So it's she was really great to work with.
We practiced this last week as a little pilot during our learning and teaching conference workshop, is to have it both online and real, and they're going to be blown away by the real moment. And we started this conversations with, well, how do we bring people back to the classroom? How do we make it meaningful? When they get to play live,
so much more fun.
They'll be blown away. But they'll see it while playing remotely, and they'll still feel like they can participate, but they'll actually be drawn in by it this way. So we're pretty excited about that next iteration and seeing that through. We're
expanding to U of T this fall, assuming we've got REB approval, and some other places as well. We're using it with like Lotus STEM and Visions of Science and the Canadian Association of Science Sensors. We're going to see how far we can take it.
One of the things we didn't look to study, but I think happened, is transferable skill development. People are debating and talking and interacting with peers and listening and collaborating. Like all of those things are happening in this game. When people are flip-flopping on the silly things and they're getting used to doing that, they flip-flop on the serious things too. And they start to listen more, and they really let themselves get inspired by other people speaking. People open up when they feel like they're in a safe environment. And then you get into real compelling storytelling because they're sharing their narrative, and that's powerful stuff. So I think it can be applied to anything across campus.